The brutal truth has got to be in there. The big challenge is to deliver it in a way that they don't switch off.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Nick Oldridge, the co-founder of Climate Science Breakthrough, an organization that seeks to prototype different ways to communicate climate science, the climate crisis we face, and what individuals can do about it. Nick's been a longtime campaigner, and it's been his ambition to improve the links between public and climate science itself. And through this recent project, one of the most interesting aspects is the fact that they have partnered leading comedians with leading climate scientists to really change the tone, way that climate science is communicated, and offer up new ways to engage people across a range of social medias. So with that, Nick, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It's really great to have you here to talk about your work, the mission that you're on over at Climate Science Breakthrough, and some of the lessons you've learned about climate science and storytelling.
So I am Nick Oldridge. I am the co-founder of the Climate Science Breakthrough, and I'm working with two very experienced and skilled people from the advertising and creative industries. But my background was manufacturing, long-time roof tile maker in the north of England. And I think that's where I became climate aware, if you like. Climate starts to enter your sphere and you realize that you're doing something that's releasing ludicrous amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. But I didn't think it would involve me, impact me, or require me to do anything. That, my background has driven me from being just a regular dude driving my electric car, doing my recycling, to someone who's now, jumped in there and decided to act on it. So
what is the Climate Science Breakthrough? What is its mission and vision, and what's the impact you're hoping to have through it?
Yeah, it's okay. Good one. The impact is all about shifting the dial on public opinions. We've got fantastic things happening in the renewable sector, and we've got great knowledge, we've got great technology. Despite all that, emissions are still rising. And I think you have to look at why that is. And it's the forces that are pushing in the wrong direction, effectively vested interests and an inherent fear by political leaders of changing stuff too quickly and becoming unpopular. And even though people are quite worried about the climate, I don't think there's a real sense of urgency. There's something that materially affects our ability to enjoy the lives we're enjoying in the medium-term future, yet we're acting more or less as if it's business as usual. So you've got this kind of inertia. And I think what we feel quite strongly is if the public arrive where many of us in the climate space have arrived, I think we'd all be reacting quite differently.
How did you decide to approach executing that when you went from a regular dude trying to do a little bit better to I'm all in and I'm putting my money, my time, my future on this?
Well, I think that if you go back to the point where I flipped, that relates to a skiing holiday, and it relates to a climate scientist called Kevin Anderson. So the skiing holiday is something I do every year with my oldest friends from college. We get together once a year. We have 4 days away, just us, and it's sublime. And so one year I come to the group and say, okay, do you reckon we could get a train up into the Alps? Because we'd save 2 tons of carbon. It's quite a thing. And the response was mixed. I got called Greta on the one hand. I had a couple of confused looks and some indifferent looks, but I realized in that moment that there was this gulf between us. There was a huge gap. Well, these are educated, empathetic, progressive individuals. Why aren't they in the same space as I'm in? So I sort of went through it in my mind and what is it I could share with them that would take them there? And you look at the newspapers that you've got on offer. There's either a few, there aren't many in the UK that scream it's the end of the world, we're all going to die, or they're full of skepticism about all the solutions. And it's and so you're scrabbling around for material. And then so I watch quite a few climate scientists. I watch their output, and I'm watching Kevin Anderson on YouTube. He is an atmospheric climate scientist, atmospheric physicist, I think. He's just delivering this really punchy, impactful, gut-wrenching, sort of fear-inducing delivery, which works on me. So I've got to find a way of taking this climate scientist, taking his words, packaging them up in a way that we sell iPhones, music, fashion, and all those things, and take it outside the climate bubble. Because at the moment, he looks like my son shot him in a uni lecture on his phone and sent it to me. It's poor quality output. They're the most important words on the planet, delivered in a way that makes anyone watching it who isn't in the eco bubble think, well, this can't really be important. Otherwise, this guy would be on the BBC, that kind of thing.
Why didn't you try and work with an established platform, medium organization to up their game? Why start something fresh?
And I knew I would keep pushing it back unless I had agency over it and felt connected to what I did. But really importantly, all the things we're doing collectively are not working. There's some amazing things we're doing, but if I'm going to burn some money, I want it to be an entirely new thing that isn't already being done. Because that's what we need multiple people like me to start doing something where previously they were not doing something, because it's a bigger effort we need, not just the same people doing a different thing, if you know what I mean.
Talk to me about then after you've said, okay, look, I'm going to do this myself, but I'm not exactly sure what to do. Who did you go find? Like who were the other co-founders and how did you bring them in? Because you had the idea, but they were the creative background. They knew the marketing piece. Like they had the framework and the tool sets that you were looking for to leverage. Were they just sitting there looking for someone like yourself, some regular dude to get off the roof and come down and help them? Or were they kind of like an organization already that you just approached and like, yeah, we can collaborate on this?
I think it was COP26, and the Utopia Bureau set off a kind of a World War II siren as a sort of publicity stunt outside COP26, and got a quick moment on the TV. And then I think that led me into their work, and it was just a case of reaching out. So we then enter this, without talking details, we just entered this to and fro of what might be a mechanism for making this happen. And then the minute I opened an email, or I think we had a meeting, and it was presented to me that we might use comedians to translate the climate scientists. It's like ping, okay, just let's do this. That's just an instant, obvious, appealing, unique, innovative idea.
When you're planning, when you're ideating, what were some principles or what were some things that you knew you had to have or you had to do as part of this for it to have the impact that you were hoping for?
Climate activity, climate output is in a niche, and it looks often like it's made by climate people who often on small budgets of cobbling things together. Like one person said to me, "Oh, you can just go and see all these climate scientists and film them on your phone and post it." So absolutely no, this has to be super high quality production, so made by professionals, and to be taken seriously. It's got to be engaging, entertaining, it's got to be shareable, actionable, it's got to invoke emotions. And at the end of the day, we've got a really difficult subject we're weaving into it. So unless we do this in a very unique, enticing manner, it's just not going to get watched.
So I won't say push back, but dive into a little bit about your idea of high quality. Who are you trying to talk to? I mean, if it's the masses, they're on TikTok. They can look at a phone. They're happy with really shit quality. Why the high quality? And was the initial idea to talk to average people, or were you looking for a certain type of group that actually appreciated the high quality?
Once you start down this process, you realize the endeavor of getting a climate scientist and an extremely busy comedian into the room at the same time with the scripts ready and all the equipment. It's such a mission to then rock up and do it in a way that is a bit throwaway. After all that work, it just seemed to make no sense. The other one is there is a lot of money being spent to counter what we're trying to do. And I guess, yeah, to come to your point about who, I'm trying to reach people primarily with agency and influence. And yeah, they want content that if it's a serious subject like this, they want it to look serious enough when they're seeing that content.
On that note, what does it take to bring together an episode? What are the key components, and how long is it taking you to either create one or frame the whole series?
Longer than I ever anticipated. Yeah, the number one thing is schedules, and I've led a busy life and I've had busy work schedules, but I've never encountered anything like talent, as they call them. And we would get comments like, "Well, we go through agents primarily, and we once were told, yeah, our guys got an hour in 3 months' time on a Tuesday afternoon. That we can give you that." Quite hard to then write the script if you don't know who the comedian is, and then the comedian needs to relate to the climate scientist. Other elements are, yeah, how we do the narrative. So what we're journey we're taking them on. But the broad structure was, okay, we've got to include the scary science because people are disconnected from what the real risks are. But we're also going to point to a villain, the fossil fuel industry sort of obstructing progress. And we're going to end with all that hope, because let's face it, we're in this super scary crisis, but we're almost lucked out on all the options we have at our disposal. So it's this kind of arc we go through. Like there is something, it's probably worse than you thought. It's coming in on timescales that are probably quicker than you thought, and it's closer than you thought. It's not something that happens to your grandkids far away. So we're bringing it home, and then we're pointing at the villain, and then we're ending with this sort of this hope part, which really explains that there's a way out of this, and it's actually quite inspiring and exciting. And the bit we settled on at the end, which again was Ben and Henrik's idea, was what we call the frank chat. So the comedian and the climate scientist make the film, and then we film them at the end having a sort of coffee and a debrief. And that we felt was important to put the humanity into the climate scientists, to ask them how are you feeling personally, and that kind of adds the personal element at the end of the piece.
Do you try and make it natural and let them ad lib, or are you really scripting it pretty tightly?
There is definitely a script there because you've got all these resources in one room. Everyone is clock watching. It all takes longer than you want it to take. So absolutely, you have to have a script. And the back and forth has quite a few options built into it. And you don't know until you film them if they're going to work necessarily. So we do film options. And one interesting thing from the first film, like in the first film, we did quite a fair bit of swearing in the first two films. Most people thought that was appropriate. As someone said, I'm sure there was quite a lot of swearing on the decks of the Titanic as it went down. But there were occasions with certain partners we were trying to work with where they said, have you got a bleep version? But by and large, most people went with that. But as we've progressed, we then shoot different lines for the clean version and different lines for the sweary version. Some of the comedians quite rightly want to finesse. You said I should say this. I think it would sound better like that. And do you know what? I am in awe of watching that happen between director and comedian, where they're communicating these tiny changes, then delivering them, and you can just feel that difference. So yeah, finessing definitely happens, but we do start with a script just to keep things moving and make sure they're punchy.
How many of these have you produced? And when you say film, are these half an hour, 5 minutes? Like,
So we've done 4 so far, and they are all short films. Now, if we were having this conversation before our attention spans all got shrunk by social media, I think they'd all be 20 minutes long. I think the first one was around the 5 mark, and we did some focus group work actually after the first two. I think 87% of our group were inspired to take further action after watching the film, so that was great. But there were comments about the length of it, and people are very short of time and they're scrolling. If we got a slot on TV, now that's a different matter, but we are making content for social media, for YouTube, Instagram, etc. And so we're down to like 4 minutes. If you talk to the young generation, that's still way too long.
and I guess that point, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way? Like you've cut from 5 minutes to 4 minutes, and you have four in the bank. What are some of the things that you've learned about, that you think are helping you tell the story better, engage better, dive a bit deeper, create more engagement after the fact?
There has been a lot of learning as we've gone along. I think the films are getting better. They're certainly getting tighter and punchier. We moved in the second two films from the first two films to the camera swinging backwards and forwards because it gave more a sense that these people are definitely interacting in the same room. One of them which was interesting, was the availability issue of the scientist and the comedian for possible press. Do we really want the climate scientist on mainstream TV? I think our biggest success was Professor Mark Maslin and Joe Brand, getting them on Good Morning Britain, and it's renowned for tearing apart climate campaigners, and it really worked. They were talking incredibly positively about the work. As Professor Mark Maslin pointed out, I'm only here because of the creativity, because of Joe Brand, because it was funny, and now we're talking about something that I don't normally get to talk about. So it's quite a powerful moment.
But so I guess it's curious, like as the scientists from their perspective, are they actually sitting there reflecting on, wow, I need to learn how to communicate better? And then they go out and actually, do they then go and try and, continue that process and try and find a better way? And
quite a big ask to do that. You're going to be ready to get really grilled, as people do. There was a physicist on a weekend breakfast politics show, and he did a fantastic rundown of carbon budgets and why they were so vital, and how they, carbon it's a cumulative problem. It's getting worse all the time. So the carbon budget runs out quite rapidly. And then the interviewer turned around and said, and so if we don't succeed in reining in emissions within the limitations of our carbon budget, what happens? And the scientist almost went blank for a moment and then said, well, the coral reefs will all die. At that point, hundreds of millions of people are turning over to watch the football. Science, if you're in science, you're taught to be absolutely certain about your work, your research. But interviewers will naturally want to move it. This is how you talk about risk. What risks come from that? What stems from that? How will it impact individuals? And that isn't an area of specialism. So it is quite a hard task to then take that all the way through to food on the shelves in the supermarket, social unrest, all the things that emanate from an unstable climate. And that's not really the job of a climate scientist, actually.
I would argue it is. There needs to be an ability to communicate the work that you're doing, the vision that you see for the outcomes, and then some steps along the way that we can avoid it. And I'm not saying that they aren't doing that, but I kind of get back to like the origin story of some of these, of your series and others I've talked to, is like they're not doing it well enough. And that's not all on them, because there's so many other things happening around them, but right, like you have to learn to engage and communicate in different ways. And I think you learn these tools, these tricks, and these frameworks to make communication more effective.
No, that's a good point. And I did think, as I was preparing in my mind for this chat, that I'm doing something that I wasn't naturally comfortable doing. And I guess the climate scientists have all got to take some risks in that regard. And that goes against their training, doesn't it? But what I end up doing is I roll myself in my mind forward to something like 2040 and say, okay, did I go far enough? Did I do enough? Do I have regrets? And I knew that where I was before this started, that I was going to be furious with myself. And I think that's what people need to do now. If anyone is struggling to know how to pitch it and what risks to take, just think how you'll feel later on.
I'm curious actually, like how the role of using comedy has helped these climate scientists maybe learn to take that risk or open up or look at a new angle. Because oftentimes there's like, the world's going to end, coral's going to die. But like you're ending on hope with everyone, or the idea that there is hope if you take action. So was that on purpose? Was that specifically to kind of taper the hard messages? How and why did you find that balance?
Oh, that was really important, and it's a huge juggling act. There's a lot of data saying don't scare people; it doesn't work. They end up paralyzed. We did try and use social psychology behind our work and how we approach things. But if you break it down, yeah, just scare them doesn't work. Just do the hope, they'll ignore it. You've got to put everything into the pot, and I think you've got to have the context of what we're talking about. Let's say we're having political discussions about making some big decisions. We're not going to make the big decisions big enough if the context is, well, it's not that bad. We've got to express the gravity of the situation, but we've got to do that without having people flick to the next thing. And I think the beauty of comedy is I don't think there's any other discipline that does that. I think comedians represent us. They're trusted messengers. We hear us when we hear them, and they talk about things that people don't like talking about, from abortion to racism to everything. And that's how comedy, a good comedian, holds our attention, talking about a subject that we wouldn't imagine was a subject that we would want to talk about or listen to. That's where I think the magic happens.
I think it's very easy for us to slip into the doom scenario because that's more tangible to us. We're all going to X. How does comedy change that? Or what have you learned about how comedy can change that?
So I think if I was doing a talk trying to weave these things in as me, I would need a lot longer to ensure that I didn't stumble and leave my audience with one of those problems that you mentioned. Either I leave them too scared or I leave them too complacent because they think, well, it's being sorted. I'll give you a good example at the moment in the UK. Our government is making noise about our emissions being 50% down on it's the 1990s we use as the base year. It's not quite the real picture, but what that does to many in the population is it takes climate change from something that they know is scary to something that's still a bit scary, but it's just moved down their list of things to worry about. We all have long lists of things to worry about, don't we? If we get this sort of super hopeful, self-congratulatory message that we're having in the UK at the moment, I think it just slips down the agenda as something to worry about later that isn't really important right now. Going back to the communication piece, unless you add some brutal truth in there, that narrative is going to win out and everyone's going to ease off because it's not really so bad. So The brutal truth has got to be in there. The big challenge to achieve all that is to deliver it in a way that they don't switch off. And I don't think you could write the recipe down for that, but I think involving comedians is probably the closest to guaranteeing that you're going to engage people.
You have a history of activism. You're clearly very passionate about this, and this is a medium for you to hopefully drive that wedge a little bit further down the road. But as you're building this, like, do you find that yourself you have to draw back a little bit? Like, look, we can't go so hard on this. If we do, we're going to lose people.
Do you know, you said a funny thing there, because I am often told, "God, it's great, Nick, that you're so passionate about this." And that was one of the things that spurred me on, actually. Okay, so you're not. And if you're not, I am assuming you haven't let reality in yet. I think if you're looking at the whole population we're talking to, and our films have been seen now, I think 9 million times, we reckon, in that big pool of people, that everyone is going to have a slightly different reaction. But I'm pretty certain there are people in there who just need some better information.
Now, let's say you do that successfully. You engage them. They open up. They're like, okay, I have to go down the rabbit hole now. And what are you hoping that they do next?
People have agency in all sorts of places, and I think I just want people to have the context and the framing to go and find where they had that influence.
So that's happened to you. And after 18 months, 2 years of working on this, how are you in terms of like the progress you want to make, the progress you still want to make? Like, where are you now, and where do you want to be in, say, 5 years?
If Climate Science Breakthrough can get enough money in to do this on a scale where we take all these climate scientists who are itching to be heard properly, but not necessarily in possession of the skills to get their messages across in a way that resonates, and we have this sort of media machine rolling out all these different messages, because if you think about it, we're just focusing on fossil fuels. You could do 5 films just on the food system. It's extraordinary. Yeah, you could produce content for every single sector in society to sort of point the way. So yeah, if we can roll through and make lots of films and make lots of impact and shift the dial across society, then I'll be more than happy.
I would argue that on some level, your job here is to inspire the next group of storytellers to pick that up as well.
I think that's an even better answer than my answer, actually. Yeah. Because yeah, ultimately there's too few of us, isn't there? That's the point. We need more numbers. We need more creativity. We need new ideas. So yeah, I'll go with your answer.
And so I'm going to follow up with that to ask you a question about your answer, which is if you had 5 people show up at your front door saying, "Hey, we saw this. We want to do it. Food, water, pets." What are some lessons that you've learned that would help them get a little bit further in telling their own story?
I think the people who I would imagine come from each sector would be the people who really know those sectors. That's fine, but understand that you're not an expert in communication. So you need to collaborate. You need to partner up. So you take your issue, can connect and collaborate with someone whose job it is to distill this into simple messaging. I think another one will be bolder than you think you should be. Roll yourself forward and imagine yourself in 2040. And if think about the things that are holding you back now. I mean, some of them might be real hard barriers, like I just haven't got the cash to do it, or the money, or the time. But think about the obstacles now and think whether they feel relevant in a world that's literally falling apart at the seams. And so yeah, come back to the now and just be bold. But I think I'm going to end on it's who you work with. It's collaboration is absolutely key, and we need to collaborate across different industries, social spheres, and yeah, we've just got to work with different people, and that's key to all this. No one person has the answer, but we just need to try and all work together.